Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Blackwell, and welcome to the Bipolar Awakenings Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Jose Hoekstra. She's a Dutch peer worker and author of the book Wings, Psychosis is a Way to Become a Full Human Being. She experienced a first psychotic episode during a meditation retreat in India over 30 years ago, after which she developed bipolar disorder later on in the Netherlands. She'll talk about her healing journey and how she reframed her experiences in which psychotic episodes have played a major part. Currently, Jose is working as a peer worker in a recovering center, and she's also the mother of 2 children, a son and daughter, who still live with her. Jose, it's good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you again, Sean. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Well, I thought your book was quite interesting. Once again, I'll put it up for people here. Wings, all right. And, most people are quite shy about their experiences. They really don't want to open up about what put them in the psychiatric hospital, and they certainly don't want to write books about it and that kind of thing. So I was curious, what inspired you to write your book?
Oh, yes. Well, I think I was shy about it in the beginning as well, the first few years. And I actually tried to work in psychiatry for a while, and then I felt that it was absolutely not done to be open about your own psychiatric problems. But I really felt that it didn't work for me. I felt that I couldn't be myself. So after a while, it was also difficult for me to work in psychiatry because of the episodes that kept coming back. So I really felt that it was a part of my journey to become more open about this and tell my story and write about it. So I started writing about it. Originally, I started writing about it in different magazines. And then a few years ago, I decided to write my book.
Okay, and when we first met, it was like a decade ago at the Crazy Wise conference, and we'll get into that later. But was that one of the magazines that you told your story to, the one that you were working for as well, or is it?
No. I started to write for the first articles for the magazine that was like the Bipolar Patients Organization in Holland. And I wrote articles for them for many years. And then for a while, I wrote also articles for an online mental health care magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I finally wrote my book, it was actually quite funny because I tried 3 times to write a book. And the first 2 times I completely got stuck because I sort of started to write from the beginning until the end. And I really became sort of, bored about myself. It was like blah, 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 too much of a long story. And I realized that I'm pretty much a writer of articles, of blogs, of short articles with a specific subject. So I decided that I was going to make a book in that way. So my book consists of a lot of small subjects. So you can basically read it separately. It's not a chronological book. It worked. It worked a lot better for me.
Mm-hmm. And trust me, I know very much about being tired of your own story because I've been doing this for 20 years and mine happened 10 years before I told the story. So I've been telling my story for 30 years and I'm sick of my story. I don't want to tell my story anymore. Well, why don't we get into it and share what you want about the book? You've got a pretty original beginning, although one that I have heard from other people about how your first episode started. So do you just want to get into that?
Yes, I will tell a little bit about how this started. This is about 30 years ago, and I was traveling on my own first to Latin America for 1.5 years, and then I went to Asia. And in Thailand, for the first time, I got into contact with a Buddhist retreat. And I went there to do a retreat of 10 days of Buddhist meditation. And I got very interested in the meditation. And then later on, I went to India and I found out there was another meditation retreat. And I went there again. It was a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat and a silent retreat. But in this case, at the end of the retreat, on the 10th day, I started to feel energy rushing up and down my spine. and I had absolutely no idea what was happening. And then I felt the energy sort of pushed open something here in my crown chakra, I know now.
Mhm.
And I had no idea at that time, but I know now that it was actually Kundalini energy that was rushing along my spine and that opened my crown chakra. And at that moment, it was a total new experience for me. I sort of encountered a total new spiritual reality. I remember I really had the feeling that for the first time in my life, I had the feeling, oh, there must be something like a God, or there must be a spiritual reality. But I
Mm.
grew up in quite an atheistic way. I was brought up in an atheistic way, so I never really believed there was a God. And at that moment, I just felt, well, I'm pretty sure now there is something like that. And it was in one way a wonderful experience, but at the same time, I didn't sleep for 3 days. And in the daytime, it was quite a wonderful experience. I had the feeling that the whole reality changed, and I felt that everything was connected to everything. But in the nighttime, I panicked because I also had the feeling that I lost myself completely. I didn't know what was happening to me. So after 3 days, they actually put me in a special room separate from other people because the meditation teachers did notice that something was going wrong with me, that I was getting confused. And after 3 days, they decided to bring me back on the train to the place where I was actually staying at that moment in India. And they actually brought me to friends, and I stayed with friends. And it took about 10 days. And after 10 days, the whole situation changed, and I was sort of back on the ground, with my feet on the ground. And I had no idea what happened. I think only later on, when I went back to Holland, I had a friend who studied to become a psychiatrist, and she told me, "Well, it sounds like you've had a psychotic episode." 1.5 years after that, I got new episodes coming back, and then after 1.5 years, I was admitted to hospital with a really severe psychotic episode, and I got the diagnosis bipolar disorder. But
Okay.
I think, to make a long story short, I think there was a long period of about 10 years in which I had like episodes every year. And in the beginning, I adopted the psychiatric view. Oh, because especially the one psychosis where I was admitted to hospital, that episode was so terrible. I really felt like I was in hell, and I had no idea what was happening to me. So when I got my diagnosis, in the first moment, I really thought, I'm happy. I know now that I don't have to go to hell. I have an illness. So I accepted to begin with, I accepted the view of psychiatry. I have an illness. I have to take my medication, my lithium. But in spite of the lithium, I kept getting episodes every year. And in those episodes, really a lot of things were happening. The sort of breakthrough episodes. Every time I felt that somehow the light broke through in my manic episodes. And
Did they all have a spiritual dimension to them from your experience? All of your
yes, in the
episodes?
first 10, 15 years, I think many of the episodes had a spiritual context
Okay.
to them. And I experienced really unity experiences and a lot of synchronicity.
Hmm.
And I think the most important thing what I experienced is that slowly, every episode, I've experienced more of a breakthrough. And one day I remember I lived in Amsterdam, and it started with my cat on my lap, which was really weird. I was sitting with my cat on my lap, and I suddenly felt that my consciousness was sort of spreading out around the cat. And I felt that suddenly I am one with the cat. And that was a really weird experience. And then I went after that, I went outside, I went on the street in Amsterdam, and suddenly this is when my consciousness completely opened up. And I felt that I was connected to the whole street I was walking in Amsterdam. And I remember that it felt like, well, it felt like heaven. It felt like I stepped into a new reality. And I thought that this was only possible in India because I had experienced this in India. And then suddenly, step by step, this was happening to me also in Holland, in Amsterdam. And it even felt as if I was stepping through a film screen. At first, I thought, oh wow, this is the fifth dimension. I had so many spiritual experiences, so I couldn't deny them. But I'm a bit of a skeptic as well. So after a while, I started to think, like, I don't think I actually step into another dimension, but I feel that I'm finally beginning to live in the third dimension. And I started to realize that I had been locked in my body and locked in my consciousness in a certain way. And that this was finally opening up. I was sort of opening up to the world. And I think this is why I put this poem by Rumi in the front of my book, where it actually says, I was knocking on a door and it opens, and I was knocking from the inside. This is what it says in the poem.
Can I read the whole poem here for a second?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
From Rumi. I've lived on the lip of insanity, wanting to know answers, knocking on a door, it opens. I've been knocking from the inside. Yeah, so please explain the poem. What does that mean to you in a bigger way?
Well, I think when I read this poem, when I found this a couple of years ago, it really made sense to me. I really felt that is exactly what I was experiencing, that I think there was a lot of insanity inside me. And I don't particularly think that the psychotic episodes were the insanity. But to be honest, I think there was a lot of insanity in me because of early traumas that I experienced. And because of the way I was brought up and everything that happened to me in my life, I ended up having a strange wiring in my brain somehow. And I felt that the psychotic episodes actually formed ways of breakthrough in my consciousness, trying to get me on the path of healing. I really felt that there were so many synchronicities as well. I really felt there was guidance from above helping me to find the path of healing. And on my way, there were, on the way, I used to think I don't have many traumas. I was convinced of that. But on the way of healing, slowly, I started to discover that I had quite a lot of traumas. But I had just pushed everything away, the very well-known metaphor of the ball that you push underwater. If you push it away really far underwater, and then one day you don't push it anymore, it comes up really high from the water because you have pushed it all underneath. Okay. And I think it was like that with me, that there were all of my emotions were very far away. I was not in touch with my actual feelings. And I started to do a lot of body work, dance therapy. And
okay, let's slow down, but we'll get to the parts about your therapy in just a second. I've got a few questions before we get there. Yeah. So it sounds like you said you grew up with a bit of an atheistic perspective, and yet you found yourself meditating on a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, your first time. What drew you to India in the first place?
Well, I think that was just a sort of a deep feeling inside that I was searching for something. And it definitely has something to do with the fact that I lost my mother really early. I lost my mother when I was 21 years old, and I grew up with my mother, most of the time only with my mother. So I basically was an orphan since I was 21. And I think losing your mother is really a very deep thing. And, when I lost my mother, you automatically start to think, what do I believe? And I remember thinking that even though I grew up being an atheist, I think I immediately felt after she died, I believe in reincarnation. I probably didn't know it, but
Mm.
I immediately felt that I believe in reincarnation. And I started to read books by Krishnamurti, and I was a little bit interested in spirituality, but I never took any spiritual practice when I was like during my studies. So when I started to travel, I think that is what drew me to India and to the meditation retreats. That's I felt something inside, somehow inside. I was searching for something, but I didn't know for what actually.
So it sounds like part of it might have been your own grieving process related to your mother, in a way, like you were sort of leaning into spirituality in a way to deal with, her passing.
Not only because actually I think the grieving for my mother, I couldn't grieve for my mother because I was just sort of surviving when this happened, and I only grieved for her like 15 years after she died. I could grieve for her, but I think I was completely blocked emotionally in a way, and I think somehow I was searching for a way out.
Searching for a way out, and so India was the
Yeah.
way out. And boy, you found a way out. You went
I
right out
found a
of
way out, but
right out of our dimension.
it was still a long way to go after that.
A long
Yeah.
way to go. A long way to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure, for sure. You mentioned something about sort of adopting the psychiatric paradigm there for a second. Did you doubt your own spiritual experiences?
In the beginning, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, well, it was very double because I was so completely overwhelmed by what happened in India that I had no framework for it. I had never heard about Kundalini. I was just, I completely went into this Buddhist retreat without any knowledge. And I remember when I was in my first psychotic episode in India, my friends actually took me or no, they didn't take me there. They went to for advice to a local Indian guru, and because they were worried about me. And this Indian guru said, "Oh, these stupid foreigners, they think they can come over here and find enlightenment in 10 days. And you shouldn't do it that way. You have to, when you do meditation, you should do it really slowly, building up over a long time." And well, I think he was completely right. And he actually predicted to my friends, and he said, "How long was the retreat?" 10 days. He said, "Okay, she will be back on the with her feet on the ground in 10 days." And he was completely right. But of course, he was right about that too. Is that, yeah, you step into something without having any clue what you're doing. And yeah.
Yeah. I put it on YouTube. I had a Kundalini awakening on a 10-day retreat in 2009. And I'm sure that if I hadn't had the study and preparation around this whole subject matter for 3 years, I could easily have ended up in the psychiatric hospital because energetically it was even stronger than what put me in the hospital in the first place. It's just the first time it happened, I had no idea what was going on. I was totally lost. Second time around, it was like, oh, okay, I get what's going on. And it was easier to integrate,
Yeah, exactly. To me, it was completely new and I had no idea. And when I went back to Holland, I got more episodes. So, and especially 1.5 years after I had been to India, I had the very, very severe psychotic episode that brought me to the hospital. And I had suicidal ideas. So I really needed to go to a psychiatric hospital. And because that really felt like, I was in hell. The message that you have an illness and there is medication sort of gave me some soothing, so it gave me something to hold on to. But the thing is, it didn't work because I kept getting these episodes more or less once a year, and I had so many spiritual experiences that I was really pushed in another direction. Because one day I had a lot of experiences where I felt that I was actually in contact with Sirius, the planet Sirius,
Okay.
and I had a very special experience that I actually got help from outer space to open my chakras. And it was a very special experience. And then when I got out of that psychotic episode, a few days later, I felt that I was pushed towards a book shop in Amsterdam. And it was an esoteric bookshop, a spiritual bookshop. And I walked into that bookshop and I found a book about the connection with Sirius and about the connection with our human evolution. And I remember I opened the book and I thought, half of what's in this book I received. Received all of this information.
Wow.
I received more or less everything what I saw in the book I had received in my psychotic episode. And at that time, I realized that this was such a strong confrontation that I couldn't deny any longer that something else was happening. And then I started to search. So I went back to India and I went to England to the meditation teachers, and I really started to search. I found the book Spiritual Emergency by Stanislav Grof.
Yeah, let me just jump in for a second, because there's a bit of a synchronicity with what you just said, because I had something that I barely wrote about in my book, Am I Bipolar or Waking Up, which was I left home in Toronto and went to Vancouver with nothing, but on that drive, I started to receive insights about life and how there was this energy between people, and my personality would shift depending on who I was with. And then when I got to Vancouver, I met a friend of mine, and he was like, Sean, everything you're talking about is in the Celestine Prophecy, this famous book from the 90s. And by the time when I finally got the book, I had basically arrived at the first 6 insights in the book, and there's 9 insights or 8 insights, and the first 6 insights in the book came to me while I was driving. And then when I was reading, I was like, everything I was thinking on the drive is right here in this book. This is exactly what you're describing with this Sirius situation.
Wow, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's like you get a download from somewhere.
Yeah. And I've had that multiple times, that I really felt that I got downloads. Yeah.
Right.
So it was like I couldn't push this away anymore. I couldn't sort of keep on denying that something else was going on than a mental illness. And then I started to search, and I think, but for a few years, I kept on sort of going back and forth, because sometimes, especially later on, when I got married and I got children, suddenly my episodes became much more severe. So in the first years of their lives, I was admitted to hospital several times. The first 10 years, I was only admitted to hospital once, and then for the rest, I always managed at home. But after I got children, I had many times I was admitted to hospital. So.
And what made them severe?
After I got children, it suddenly changed to getting very severe depressive psychotic episodes, where I became acutely suicidal. And that was very scary. I experienced those psychotic episodes as less spiritual.
Okay.
Basically.
And there's a diagnosis for that too, postpartum depression, right? Like, it's kind of common for mothers to go into depressions after they've given birth.
Yeah, maybe. Although I have to say, I had multiple psychotic episodes like that. And later on, there were more traumas coming up. And one of the traumas that is part of my history is that my father left already before birth. And he originally told my mother that he wanted to have a child with her. But when she got pregnant, he completely changed his mind. And he actually started to threaten her, to push her into having an abortion. And I literally experienced one day that I relived this feeling, that I felt that I myself want to live. I have a very strong wish to live, because I never felt suicidal in the sense that I wanted to kill myself, but I felt like as if somebody ordered me to commit suicide. I had an idea that if I don't commit suicide, something will go terribly wrong with the world, something like that.
So you didn't really want to kill yourself. You were killing yourself or wanting to commit suicide for others or for the planet, something like that?
Something like that. That was the idea, the delusion that I had. But so I always felt that I was ordered to do it. And to me, I over the years I've learned to connect this to the experience of my father, who was outside there when I was in the womb, trying to push my mother to have an abortion, which she didn't want, obviously.
And did you come to these insights mostly on your own, or did the therapist help you get there? Was there any intuition by your therapist that your disorder was rooted in childhood trauma?
No, I think most of it came up on my own. I think this whole Kundalini process really makes you go through. It makes you go on and go. There's no way you can't stop. Things keep on coming up, and traumas keep on coming up. And what happened with my father is that I actually had one episode where I remember very clearly that I was lying in my bed and I felt like a child in the womb of my mother. And I really relived the threat of my father. And I think after that experience, I felt that there must be a connection between this episode and the fact that I feel this suicidal idea.
Okay, so that wasn't part of any spiritual practice or therapeutic practice. It was simply the content of an episode.
This happened at home. It just happened at home.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And imagine if somebody could have been there to support you, who understood what was going on, that you could have shared this with. But with no support, no structure around you, what can you do? It's almost impossible to get that through that on your own, even though the content is just sitting there waiting to be healed, you know?
Yeah, it was pretty hard to do that on my own, but I did share things like this sometimes later on with a therapist. So not at the moment because there was nobody there, but I met many therapists on the way, and then I would share these things later on with somebody.
Okay, so after the fact. So you were
after the fact.
You were kind of like your own therapist, working through things for yourself, and then you would go to another therapist and tell them what happened.
Yeah. I've had psychiatrists who told me that. Oh, you are your own therapist. You know better than I do.
Certainly sounds that way. Certainly sounds that way. Wow.
Yeah, I felt that this whole Kundalini process is like an internal therapist. It's sort of, but it's not particularly easy. I mean, I really felt that it's actually. I had no choice. It was like, I have to go through this all and work out everything, or I commit suicide. But there is no stopping. There is no place where I say, "Oh, I don't want to go to another therapist. I don't want to work out another trauma. I'm fine as I am, and I take my medication." And there's like no way. It was always going on. I think until, at least for about 25 years. Because the last 5, 6, 7 years, things have finally quieted down, and I think my life has finally sort of settled in a easier stream.
Well, what does quieted down mean exactly? For example, do you not have disturbing episodes anymore? Is that stopped, or?
Much less. Although I still do take some medication. Very, very little. I take 200 milligrams of lithium, and I take 4 drops of Haldol, which is like 0.20 milligrams, something like that.
Okay.
And I finally found a psychiatrist who was willing to sort of experiment with me and to try and see which was working the best for me. So this definitely keeps me stable, but it's still. I still have a risk because I had so many psychotic episodes. I always say my brain knows this road of the psychosis. So if you have a lot of stress, I think it's like somebody else who has like a migraine or something. That somebody else will have a lot of stress and then get migraine. When I have a lot of stress, my brain is just going into psychosis. So I still have to be careful with that, but it's getting much better. And in the
Mhm.
since I'm working as a recovery worker, I've learned a lot as well. Working in groups, working with other people who are all in recovery, you are all mirrors for each other. And
Mhm.
I've learned that if something is happening, like recently, one of our coordinators was fired, and I had a bit of a discussion, argument, as you can say, with her about a week before. And actually, it was all settled and it was not a problem anymore. But because of this situation, when I heard that she was fired, my first thought, and this is always like that, is it's my fault. It's my fault because of me. This happened. If I
Mhm.
heard about other people committing suicide, I would always think it's my fault. It's something that I did, and it's such an old how do you say the conviction
Conviction,
uh
like a
huh?
deeply held belief, a deeply held belief.
Yeah, yes, deeply held belief.
Right.
It's so deep in my system that in daily life I don't feel this so much anymore. I feel that my self-image is much more healed. It's much better than before, but it's still there. When something like that happens, it's still there. It just sort of kicks in, and then my spirit will just go whoosh. But this time, somebody, actually a good friend of mine, talked to me on the phone for about an hour, and that was enough. And I realized this is an old belief. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. And they told me it's not true. It has nothing to do with you, that she was fired. It's not true. And then I have a night of good sleep, and it's gone. It's okay. So
Mm. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it is getting better.
it's you're recognizing what in psychology they call projections. You're starting to recognize that when you see this other person being fired and it's my fault. This has roots back into your childhood, most likely. This sort of
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
self-blaming. And what's very
Yeah.
interesting about your story is, you've been dealing with this for 30 years. The typical thing that psychiatry tells everybody is that the episodes gradually get worse. But in your case, the episodes did get worse, but then they started to get better because you started to really be this therapist for yourself.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I do. I have to be honest that I do need the medication, because I tried. For a while that I thought it's only the Haldol that keeps me stable, because the lithium never did. So then
Mm.
I've always been very stubborn. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try without the lithium, without telling my psychiatrist. So,
Sure.
and after 3 months, I was admitted to hospital because it didn't work.
Yeah.
So since
But
then, I do know I do need it.
yeah, but all I'm saying is I'm not saying that you've cured yourself or anything, but that your episodes have shifted again. They're not as disturbing. Once you started to turn towards
Absolutely.
yourself, become more introspective, it's a gentler process for you. You know the road in a way. I guess you've got experience with the whole thing. And it's gotten a little bit easier. And for most people, it just gets more difficult and more difficult and more difficult. And it's more meds and more symptoms and more problems. So it's nice to hear that introspection, being your own therapist to a certain degree, has played some benefits. It hasn't healed you completely, but it's certainly taken you in a positive
Yeah,
direction.
yeah, yeah. Well, it hasn't healed the capacity to become psychotic, but what it definitely has healed is that I had different traumas, and they kept coming up in the course of over the years, one by another, and especially a very early trauma that came up very late in my life. Well, after that was a trauma of some relatively light sexual abuse, but because it was very early, it was very. I didn't remember it for so many years, and when it came up, it all came up in images, because I was probably about 2.5 years old,
Mm.
and I had a voice in one of my psychotic episodes that told me that something had happened with this person. And I searched for it, but I couldn't find it. I even started to do hypnotherapy to try and find it. But apparently, you have to be ready for certain traumas to be able to work through them. Sometimes you're not ready for it. Apparently, I wasn't ready for it. So it didn't, I had no memory. It didn't come up. And I thought, okay, forget it. Maybe it didn't happen. But I did remember that voice. And then at a certain moment, somebody died in my family. And I started to look through my photo albums. And then something opened up in my brain, and I became psychotic again as a result also of it. But all the images came out, and I realized it actually did happen. And I could see myself hanging in the corner of the room, looking down upon myself. So I must have sort of gotten out of my body.
Big dissociation, yeah.
Yes,
and this is the two aspects of that story are very common. And one is to have completely blocked memories about these kind of things is a very common situation. And it's also common for people when they're abused to see themselves from above. It's as if they're watching it happen to them from above. I've heard that a number of times. Yeah.
So, exactly.
Yeah.
But the fact that when that came out, and I basically worked through it by making a lot of drawings. In the beginning, it was difficult because my family sort of denied that it could have happened, and friends denied that, this is probably not so bad. Until I met a woman who worked for an organization on sexual abuse.
Right.
And she helped me so much because her own history was much more severe than my history. But she told me, don't ever, I don't know the word in English. Maybe never deny it, or never make this smaller. Because look at what it did to your life. And I have to be honest, I mean, when I look back, it had a very big impact, because I started to shit my pants and pee in my pants and in my bed and everything for a long time.
Okay.
So as a child, this was completely mixed up, and it took a long time for that to get in order. And at that time, this was the 60s, people of course didn't know. They just think that, well, you're a difficult child, you can't learn these things, or something is wrong with me. And I got very angry, and they put me in the hallway because I got so angry. And so I think now people know that this kind of things have to do with that your boundaries are crossed. Something went wrong. And
so signs of trauma are showing up in your life in childhood.
In many ways.
Like when you're 6 years old, 7 years old, you're showing signs of trauma.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes. So I realized that already at that early age, since nobody knew what happened, and my feelings sort of, I always say they went under the table. They just disappeared. My feelings, I put my feelings far away. And when I look at the pictures in my albums, I have many, many pictures of myself in childhood where I never look into the camera. I always look away. I always feel ashamed to look into the camera. After that came out, my head became much more quiet. There was like a certain inner peace that was never there. I think that was, for me, the most important proof that something really happened at that age, and it was much more important trauma than you can imagine, even though it's maybe not such a it was not such a big experience, but it had a very big impact on me. And when it finally came out and I worked through it and all the feelings that come with it, then I got much more inner peace. So I also feel, in many ways, I feel healed, even though I still have the capacity to become psychotic. Another thing is, you were talking about downloads earlier. I literally experienced times where I was just lying in my bed and my eyes would go endlessly, just go blink, 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 blink like that.
Hmm.
And I felt I could nearly literally feel that my brain was rewiring. So I really felt there's a lot of insights coming to me, a lot of downloads, information coming to me that I had to work through. And it made me rewire my brain.
Interesting.
And when I now look at how I'm actually living in the world, it has nothing to do anymore with who I was when I was like 20 years old. And sometimes this is a really strange experience because I'm still the same person. I still have the memories from my childhood, and as far as I have memories. But I remember I used to dance in a dancing group a long time ago, and then some years ago they had a reunion, and I never saw the people anymore of this group. But I went there because it was nice to see people again, and I was sitting there, and I thought they were, having the same music and doing the same dances and everything. And I was sitting there and I thought, okay, my brain recognizes the music. I know that I've danced in this group. I know that I know all these people. But I was sitting there and I was like, I feel like I'm totally a different person than I when I was in this group. So it was a very weird
Hmm.
experience, really weird. So it's like I had, apart from the spiritual experiences, I had a lot of emotional development to catch up with.
It certainly
It's like,
sounds like it.
yeah, I was sort of stuck in my emotional development, and I became. I think only in the beginning of my 40s and the end of 30s or the beginning of my 40s that I was more or less emotional mature. It took a long time,
Right,
and
right.
I had to learn things. Even when my children were going to school, I had to learn some social skills that they were learning automatically at 3, 4 years old. So I was learning with my kids actually.
Wow, wow. It
Yeah,
reminds me,
yeah,
when I was 18, I was one of those guys who kind of had the world by the ass. I had everything a teenager would want. At 18, I had a car, I had a job, I had a girlfriend, I had good grades in school. Emotionally, I thought I was perfectly fine. And it wasn't until I ended up in the hospital that the sort of the lid came off, you know, which is
yeah,
basically
yeah.
that kind of experience. And then once the lid's off, then you start to become very, cognizant of what's going on inside and getting in touch with these different feelings as they're sort of evolving and coming through. And at this point, I'm much more, like you said, I'm much more in touch with my feelings at this age, as you are too. And it's nice to hear that you've had so much development, even though you've been to a certain degree suppressed by medications and the system and all that, but you didn't let it stop you. You were able to just keep
No,
going.
that is. I'm well, as I said, I'm quite stubborn, but I'm happy for that because
Mm.
I've heard so many stories of people who sort of nearly get poisoned by getting too much medication, and that never happened to me. But it also because I was always because I was already in this Kundalini process. I really felt that I can take medication, but I want to feel myself. I want to make sure that I feel myself because I need to feel myself because this process needs to go on. And sometimes when I was admitted to hospital, of course you get more medication, and sometimes you get a lot to suppress the psychotic
Mm.
episode. But as soon as I got out of the hospital, I always made sure to,
Take it down a little
uh,
bit.
yeah, take it down and go back to just the lithium. And in
Okay.
a sense, I've taken quite a lot of risk with myself also,
Mm.
because I never wanted to take so much medication that I couldn't feel myself anymore.
Hmm. And this desire to sort of stay in touch with what you clearly saw was a process, was that supported by anybody? or was it just you kind of just insisting that you need to go through something here?
Well, I searched a lot in the alternative circuit. So yeah, it was definitely supported by the therapists that I searched. I went to see many different therapists who were either partly from the regular circuit or and also had some alternative therapy, or they were completely alternative. But the only time when I had to do with the official regular mental health care, that was when I was admitted to hospital. And what I always did, I always felt I am not recovering here. I am just here because I got so confused and I am maybe suicidal. I have to be here just to for my own protection. And I just made sure that I told nobody over there anything about what was happening to me, and just made sure that I got out as soon as possible. And then I always felt now I can recover. So usually I went to look for another therapist in the alternative circuit. And there in this circuit, I found quite a lot of people who could support my process and who understood my process. And I do have to say that I was lucky that for a while in Amsterdam, I had a psychiatrist in a private practice. She unfortunately died quite a lot of years ago already. But she understood more also about the Kundalini process. I visited her for a couple of years, and she gave me the freedom to try out body work, to try out other therapies. And I always came to her just to talk to her, how is it going and how are you doing? And I think I was quite lucky to have her in this process.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And one thing that you mentioned that I think is really interesting, I had a client a couple of years ago who was a psychiatrist and who also had a lot of experience with alternative therapies. And she, like you, she knew enough to medicate herself so that she could sleep, so that she could be grounded to a certain degree, but not so much medication that it would stop her process. Now
exactly, yeah.
And being a psychiatrist, she was in a position where she could literally give herself the prescription,
Yeah.
But so she knew, but how many people are in that position? And it sounds like you followed the same path that she did to a certain degree in reducing your meds, not to break the flow of what's happening with you, but enough to stay, grounded to a certain degree.
Basically, because I was quite stubborn myself, but it wasn't always easy because I remember after I left my psychiatrist in Amsterdam, because I moved to another place outside of Amsterdam, and then I came into the regular mental health system, and that was also a time when there was a lot of things changing. So the psychiatrists were constantly changing, and then one day I decided that I wanted to take half of my lithium because it wasn't helping anyway. And I wanted to try to take half of my lithium. But I was open enough to tell the psychiatrist, I want you to think with me, what can we do and how can we do this? But he was so following the protocol. So he just thought, oh, this is another of those terrible, stubborn manic depressives, those bipolar patients who always throw away their medication. And he was just like, I'm not going to treat you anymore. There's the door you can go. So, yeah, sometimes it was not so easy.
But that sort of approach, what can we do? What can we, how can we work together? That's not what they're used to. They're used to, listen, we don't work together. I'm the psychiatrist. You're the patient. I tell you what to do. It's not a joint collaboration. You're bringing a different.
It used to be like that.
Used to be like that?
Well, I do. There's absolutely still psychiatrists over here in Holland who still think in that way.
Oh,
but
really?
There is a change. There is a change going on. I think over the last 5 or 6 years. Well, Jim van Os, who is a professor here in Holland, so he's been actively working on changes in the mental health care system. And I feel that he started this online platform, and
Mm.
I think over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you can feel that some things are changing. And I also felt that in the last 6, 7 years, I came into I got a very good psychiatric nurse, and she then said, let's look for your medication, let's check your medication, and let's work together. So they actually gave me the space to experiment and try out is this medication working well, this medication, no, let's try together. And they had a different attitude.
Nice to
But this
hear.
is only in the last, say, yeah, maybe 8 years or so, that things are slowly changing. And I think many psychiatrists are also changing now and more listening to their patients, but of course, not all of them. But yeah.
Mhm. Great. And speaking of alternative movements, why don't we talk about Crazy Wise a little bit? I think I met you the first year of the Crazy Wise conference, which I played a part in putting together. You as well.
Yes.
Do you want to tell
Yes.
people about Crazy Wise and how it's developed
Yes.
since we first met?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first Crazy Wise conference, I only heard about it later on, and then I came to the conference as a visitor. And I think this was started because you actually asked, I'm coming to Europe, and maybe there are people who can organize something so I can give a lecture. And then you brought some people together from
Yeah.
Belgium and from Holland, and they actually started the first Crazy Wise conference.
Right. Right.
Yeah, Ruud was one of. Ruud has been very long until
From the
last
beginning.
Crazy
Yeah.
Wise. He has been there from the beginning. And I stepped in at the second Crazy Wise conference. And so 2014, it was the first Crazy Wise conference. And the conference was basically set up to give another perspective on psychotic episodes, to just give the perspective that we don't want to deny that it can be a horrible experience, it can be illness, it can be terrible to go through, but it's also much more than that. Many people report alternative consciousness states, and many people report feelings of transformation, that it has actually transformed their life, and they really a new road opened on their path. And so we wanted to give attention to that. And we also at that time heard about the film Crazy Wise. Phil Borsch was actually working on the film at that
Right.
moment, and he gave us the permission to use the name in our conference. And then I think a few years later, we also had the film Phil Borsch also came and showed the film. And I think you were there too, or maybe you were on another conference. You were there about 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, I was there the first 2 times for sure, and maybe the third year as well. Yeah, and Phil, it was funny because I invited Phil. I was like the one who reached out to Phil, and we kind of all agreed that Crazy Wise was a great name for a conference, and the name of my YouTube channel was Bipolar Waking Up, and that was kind of agreed that was a lousy name for a conference. So it was a no-brainer to sort of bring Phil in, and it was a nice fit, you know. And now we're friends. I visited Phil in his house in Seattle, and we've attended conferences together in Prague. And it's kind of funny how life has brought us together, you know, in 3 different cities, you know.
It's very understandable the way you had the approach that Phil had. It also connects very well, I think, with your approach.
Sure, sure. And he has quite a bit of stuff on shamanism and in transpersonal psychology, this sort of shamanic orientation to things, you know. So it all came together in a very interesting way. Are the Crazy Wise conferences still continuing? I knew he moved to Portugal. I don't know if he's still there.
Yeah, Ruud actually moved to Portugal, but we did organize one more Crazy Wise conference last year. That was already the eighth Crazy Wise conference. And well, we have a sort of the idea of organizing a Crazy Wise conference every 2 years. But well, at the moment, we are also sort of in rest and everybody is doing other things. So we still have to wait and see if we can get people together again for a next conference. That's always
Yeah.
finding out, because it's a lot of work, of course,
Conferences
to
take a
organize
ton
it.
of energy. They take a ton of
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah, it has been an important day for a lot of people. I mean, people have been asking to us many times, like, is there a new conference coming, and when is it coming? And it has formed an important day for a lot of people for networking and to get in touch with another view on psychosis. I remember we once had a conference a few years ago where a woman would stand up in the crowd and he said, "Why haven't I found this before?" Because she felt so stigmatized. She
Right.
felt so
Right.
stigmatized in her experiencing psychosis, and the fact that we offered another view for her was so. She was so happy to find that different view.
And what?
But now I think it's spreading much more. Actually,
Yeah, I think
I think
so.
more and more people find this different view, the idea of spiritual emergency. Yeah.
And one thing that was interesting, and this was Ruud's idea, was he was pretty aggressive about promoting to therapists, making sure that they could get certain credits towards their credentials with Crazy Wise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
and
only managed to do that one year.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
year, and
Yeah.
but then
Uh,
also bringing in people who, peers from the health system, the mental health system, people with lived
yes.
experience, and so they were all there in the same room together, sitting side by side, not across from each other, which was like a different thing for the time.
Yeah, I think that first year there was such a buzz of energy. It was quite amazing what was happening.
I was
There were a lot of
bouncing off the
people from
walls.
outside of Holland. Yes,
I was
I
just
remember that.
I was just bouncing off
But
the walls. Yeah.
it was the first time that something like that was organized.
And people from
Yeah,
7 countries came to see me in Rotterdam.
yeah,
It was like,
yeah,
what's going on?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So cool,
yeah.
cool. Well, we should probably wrap it up. Is there anything else that we should cover before we head
Yeah,
out? We've
I don't know. I think what I one thing that I would love to talk about a little bit is that's in my book also, is I think one thing that is not spoken about so often, but it's a part of spiritual emergency, is the changing of religion or the changing of spirituality. That it's a sort of the reframing of not only of your experiences, but sometimes you have to reframe your whole life. Is that in my case, I was brought up in an atheistic way. And then when you get spiritual experiences, that is already a total change to your life. Because from one day to another, you are not an atheist anymore because you can't be because of the experiences. And what happened in my case is that because it happened to me at a Buddhist retreat, for many years I felt that I was obliged to be a Buddhist. And in the beginning, there's a lot of good in Buddhism. I really felt there's a lot of good things in Buddhism, and the rules of how to live, and what is it, how do you deal with other people, and there's a lot of good things. The steps that you can follow, the thing in meditation. It's not a dogmatic religion. It gives you tools for
Yeah.
life.
It
So there's a
can
lot
be
of
a
good things in
dogma.
Buddhism.
It can be dogmatic, but generally with Westerners, it's
Yeah.
not, right?
No, no, exactly. But
Yeah.
what happened with me, I had an important experience with this. I went to retreats also in England and in Holland later on, Buddhist retreats,
Right.
Vipassana retreats. But then what happened to me is that my marriage sort of started to fall apart, and I became more and more angry because I was very frustrated. And I had this terrible anger. And even after I divorced, I still had those angry bouts of anger, really towards my children. My children were still relatively small, and I would get really angry at them because they weren't fast enough, putting on their shoes when they went to school, something simple like that.
Okay.
I think most mothers will recognize it.
Right.
But I became too angry. I became very angry. And I realized that's not good. And I want to do something about it. And I actually went to do a course in mindfulness that was specially designed for parents. And I thought, wow, maybe that's a good thing to do. But I went there with the idea I want to get rid of my anger. And well, you know what mindfulness is like. So mindfulness doesn't tell you to get rid of your anger. Mindfulness tells you to look at everything that is happening inside you. What is coming up? What are you feeling? What are your thoughts passing by? It's just telling you not to judge and to look at everything that is happening. So I came back from that course with the idea I'm just going to look at my anger. And for the first time, I started to realize that there was a lot of judgment inside myself.
Mm-hmm.
But not only inside myself, I also felt that there's a lot of, even in Buddhism and even in Christianity, I think very often there is a bit of a judgment that anger is not good. And I felt that, even in Buddhism, I felt that with all the laughing monks, I often got the message, anger is not good. Anger is not a good thing to have. So the weirdest thing that happened to me is I started to do a course in mindfulness, which comes from Buddhism, and I fell off my Buddhist beliefs. So I actually left Buddhism because of a course in mindfulness. And already.
So that's very interesting. Taking a course in Buddhist meditation led you to leave Buddhism.
To leave Buddhism, yes, exactly. Well, of course, in mindfulness.
Right.
But by that time, as I wrote in my book, I had quite a lot of experiences with nature also, with seeing the auras of trees and with feeling contact with nature. I already had done a course in permaculture, which is a way to work with an edible garden. And so I think nature was already quite a big thing in my life. And then I started to discover the natural religions, which I think that religion was originally there in Europe. And I felt much more at home there. I felt more at home with you would maybe call it paganistic religions. Okay. And one thing, I met somebody who she calls herself a modern witch.
Right.
Now, I felt like, I'm not like that. I don't want to go and be a witch and dance in the forest with a long dress under the moon. It's not my style.
Not my style.
But it's not my style. But when I met her, she actually turned out to be a person. She's a writer in Holland, and she calls herself a modern witch. And she had a lot of knowledge on natural religion and also on Carl Jung and on shadow work and things like that. I started to read a lot of books on the natural religions that were originally here in Europe. And I felt that, shamanism is a part of that too. Around the same time, I also saw the movie Crazy Wise, and I think that also gave me so much more understanding that to me it felt much more natural. I did not join any group, but even in psychotic episodes, came into contact with my ancestors, and I felt that it gave me a bit of a feeling of roots. That you make contact with some old roots that have been here also in Europe for a long time. And
but it's interesting. It's interesting the words you're using, though. You're talking about an experience, a feeling of roots. This relationship you're having with what I would call a postmodern shamanism. It's about a feeling of the divine or an experience of the sacred. It's not about a dogmatic belief like, I believe in Jesus Christ and this kind of thing. It's the actual raw sense of the divine that you're sharing with other people.
Exactly. And it's also the sense of that the divine can be found in nature, and that we are absolutely a part of nature. We are not people, looking at nature. We are not there to control nature, but we are part of nature. And nature, there's a lot of, the nature is divine in itself. That is also really how I feel. I can
Mm-hmm.
feel it. So yeah, it has a lot of to do with the experiences that I
Mm-hmm.
feel.
I find nature a little bit itchy, actually, but I do like the beach.
Yeah.
Nature makes me itch. Every time I come out of the forest, I'm just like, what is that on me?
Yeah.
But no, I get what you're saying, and I love the beach, let me tell you. But we should wrap it up. This was great to hear about your shamanic experience too. Fascinating interview. Thank you very much. I think you've offered people a lot of insight, a lot of tips, and I think for a lot of people who've been medicated for a lot of years, a fresh perspective that you don't have to give up on yourself, regardless of how many years you've been medicated or how much you're medicated or what your experiences are like. Once you start to turn inward, things can get better. Things
Absolutely.
really get better.
Yeah. Never give up on yourself. It's absolutely, it's always possible to recover.
Nice.
Even after many years. Yeah. Yeah.
Really appreciate that insight. It's terrific. Jose Hoekstra, everybody. Can I get a round of applause for Jose? All right. So
thank you very much, Sean.
Yeah.
For giving me this possibility.
Yeah, wonderful having you. I'll have it up in a few weeks. And I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I've learned a lot too today. So one more time about the book. We'll put the book up here. Wings.
Yes.
What's the subtitle?
Yeah, it can be found on Amazon.
Yeah, it can be found on Amazon.
The Psychosis as a way to. I don't know the English, so maybe you should say
Psychosis as a way to become a full human being.
Full human being, yeah.
Right. And that reminds me, I should probably do a shameless plug for myself, because this podcast is sponsored by me, and I'm going to be coming out with a training course for people in probably a month or two, a full free training course that is going to help people become introspective and get more in touch with the kind of things that Jose is talking about. It's going to be based on the work of Ken Wilber and Stan Groff, and it's going to introduce certain healing modalities where people are going to be able to do their healing safely at home. That's my goal anyways. So it's a very thorough program. So stay tuned, because that's coming up soon, and that's why you haven't heard from me for so long. I haven't made a podcast in a year. It's because I've been working on this program. So that'll be coming up soon. All right. So Jose, thanks again, and I'll see you next time on the Bipolar Awakenings podcast. Thanks. Bye-bye.